The Amorites and Rephaim have a shared lineage, both rooted in ancient Canaanite culture. While Scripture first identifies the Amorites as descendants of Canaan, it often portrays the Rephaim as giants linked to the Anakim. These powerful adversaries pose significant challenges during Israel's conquest. Find out why the Israelites were commanded to eliminate them. In the last session, we looked at the Hittites and discovered that there were various groups using that name, namely Indo-Europeans. We're going to look at some of the other clans who were in the Promised Land, and we'll look at the Amorites and the Rephaim because both groups share a lineage in ancient Canaanite culture. But we need to find out more about their true connections to the sons of Canaan. All of the clans in Canaan were wicked and evil, but the Amorites were one of the prominent Canaanite tribes frequently depicted as embodying a character that was profane and wicked, and we need to know why. Let's go back to the prophecy that was given to Abraham. This comes from Genesis 15:12-16. Now when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. Then he said to Abram, this is the Most High speaking, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also, the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward, they shall come out with great possessions. Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall return here. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. As you continue reading, you see that it names the ruling clans who would be in the land when it was time for the chosen people to go in and displace them. Let's read verses 18-21. On the same day the Most High made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Now, I listed the names of the sons of Canaan on the right, and we see that some of the names are different. The Amorites are on both lists, but the Rephaim were not named as sons of Canaan. So where did they come from? Let's do some digging. Let's look at this from Jubilees 29:5-11. And in the 7th year of the 4th week, Jacob turned his face toward Gilead in the 1st month, on the 21st thereof. And Laban pursued after him and overtook Jacob in the mountain of Gilead in the 3rd month, on the 13th thereof. And the Most High did not suffer him to injure Jacob, for he appeared to him in a dream by night, and Laban spake to Jacob. And on the 15th of those days Jacob made a feast for Laban and for all who came with him. And Jacob sware to Laban that day, and Laban also to Jacob, that neither should cross the mountain of Gilead to the other with evil purpose. And he made there a heap for a witness, wherefore the name of that place is called the heap of witness after this heap. But before, they used to call the land of Gilead the land of the Rephaim, for it was the land of the Rephaim, and the Rephaim were born there, giants, whose height was 10, 9, 8, down to 7 cubits, and their habitation was from the land of the children of Ammon to Mount Hermon, and the seats of their kingdom were Karnaim and Ashtaroth and Edrei and Meshur and Beon. And the Most High destroyed them because of the evil of their deeds, for they were very malignant, and the Amorites dwelt in their stead, wicked and sinful, and there is no people today which has wrought to the full of all their sins, and they have no longer length of life on the earth. Did you catch that? No other people were more wicked and sinful than the Amorites. They took the place of the Rephaim, the giants who were born in that place. Let's confirm that in Deuteronomy 3:11 through 13. It says, "For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. Indeed, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. Is it not in Reba of the people of Ammon?" So same location. 9 cubits is its length, and 4 cubits its width, according to the standard cubit. And this land which we possessed at that time from Aroer, which is by the river Arnon, and half the mountains of Gilead and its cities, I gave to the Reubenites and the Gadites. The rest of Gilead and all of Bashan, the kingdom of Og, I gave to half the tribe of Manasseh. All the region of Argob, with all Bashan, was called the land of the giants. So Reuben and the Gadites were given a portion of that land in Gilead, where the Rephaim lived, and a half tribe of Manasseh was given the rest. You should know that the giants are often referred to by several names, including Nephilim, mentioned in Genesis 6. They're described as the offspring of the sons of Yah and daughters of men. They are also known as Rephaim, another term for giants, often associated with the Anakim. And the Anakim were a tribe of giants mentioned in Numbers 13, described as being very tall and intimidating. So Rephaim. There are also other terms for the Rephaim. They were also known as Zamzumim and Emim, and were of the Amorites. Now, based on what we just read in Deuteronomy 3, Og was the last of the Rephaim, meaning he was a direct descendant of the fallen. He was the last direct descendant. It does not mean that their bloodline was wiped out, because those giants had children. So their bloodline remained in the earth. How else would there be a giant named Goliath coming against the children of Israel at a much later date? So let's confirm that. This comes from 2 Samuel 21:15 through 22. When the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. Then Ishbi-benob, who was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels, who was bearing a new sword, thought he could kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, "You shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." Now it happened afterward that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite killed Saph, who was one of the sons of the giant. Again there was war at Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan the son of Jerioregim the Bethlehemite killed the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Yet again there was war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand, and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant. So when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimea, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So we see that they are battling against the children of those giants. We also see that the Anakim were in the land of the Amorites when we read this passage from Deuteronomy 1:26-28. It's a rebuke of the children of Israel after they refused to take the promised land initially because they were afraid of the giants. And they paid a big price for that. There was a 40-year delay. They had to sojourn in the desert for 40 years. Listen to this. Nevertheless, you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Most High Yah, and you complained in your tents and said, because the Most High hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us. Where can we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying, the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakim there. Let's connect the Amorites to the fallen. This comes from Deuteronomy 3:1-2. It says, then we turned and went up the road to Bashan, and Og, king of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. And the Most High said to me, do not fear him, for I have delivered him and all his people and his land into your hand. You shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. So we see that Og was one of the 2 kings of the Amorites who were dispossessed, the other being King Sihon. Bible Hub is going to talk about these 2 kings of the Amorites. It says the term 2 kings of the Amorites refers to Sihon and Og, 2 prominent monarchs who ruled over Amorite territories east of the Jordan River during the time of the Israelites' journey to the Promised Land. These kings are significant figures in the biblical narrative, particularly in the context of Israel's conquest of Canaan under the leadership of Moses. Sihon was the king of the Amorite city-state of Heshbon. His kingdom was located in the region that is now part of modern-day Jordan. The biblical account of Sihon is primarily found in the book of Numbers and the book of Deuteronomy, when the Israelites, led by Moses, requested passage through Sihon's territory. He refused and instead mobilized his army to confront them. So Og was the king of Bashan, another Amorite kingdom located to the north of Sihon's territory. But you see that both were defeated by the children of Israel. There are other sources tying the Rephaim to the Amorites, and this information comes from studylight.org. It says, in post-biblical literature, the Canaanites are usually spoken of as the Amorites, and they were characterized by the chronicler R. Hosea as the most intractable of all nations. It says there is a special section in the Talmud that is devoted to the various superstitions called the ways of the Amorites. And according to the book of Jubilees, the former terrible giants, the Rephaim, gave way to the Amorites, an evil and sinful people whose wickedness surpasses that of any other, and whose life will be cut short on earth. Listen to what it says here in 2 Baruch 60 verses 1 and 2. It says, and the black 5th waters which you have seen raining are the works which the Amorites wrought, and the spells of their incantations which they wrought. and the wickedness of their mysteries, and the mingling of their pollution. But even Israel was then polluted by sins in the days of the judges, though they saw many signs which were from him, speaking of the Most High, who made them. Now, according to the Chronicle of Jeremiah, the tribes of Israel learned all their wickedness from the Amorites. The Amorites were described as the masters of witchcraft. And here we see some confirmation of that. It says even Israel was then polluted. Let's look at some of the other sins they were known for. This information comes from Bible Hub, and they're talking about the sin of the Amorites. It says, while Genesis 15:16 references the iniquity of the Amorites, Scripture as a whole describes the broader sins of the Canaanite peoples, frequently grouping the Amorites among them. What were they known for? Idolatry and pagan worship. It says the Amorites followed gods such as Baal and other regional deities. They built altars, practiced rituals involving sexual immorality, and sometimes even sacrificed the young ones. Examples can be found in Leviticus 18. So it says archaeological evidence from sites like Urgit indicates that Canaanite religious practices involved ritual prostitution and gruesome offerings to appease deities. They were also known for sexual immorality. So it says Leviticus 18 includes a list of prohibited sexual practices that were characteristic of the people residing in the land of Canaan. The text warns Israel not to emulate these abominations, because it was for such reasons that Yah's judgment would eventually fall on the original inhabitants. So it reads, do not defile yourself by any of these practices, for by all these things the nations I am driving out before you have defiled themselves. So it says, although the word Amorites is not specifically referenced in every verse, they are part of the broader Canaanite collective engaged in these practices. They were also known for violence and corruption. It says the Amorites also participated in the violence and corruption that plagued Canaan. The biblical portrayal shows that they resisted Yah's standards of justice and morality, violently opposing Israel's passage and settlement. This defiance and aggression formed part of the cumulative sin that brought about their ultimate downfall. Let's continue on with some additional information on the Amorites. This says, at present, it is not very easy to show the connection between the monumental Amorites and the Palestinian Amorites of the Bible. Why? Why isn't it easy to show the connection between the Amorites found on the monuments with Palestinian Amorites of the Bible? Is it because we're dealing with a similar situation like with the Hethites, who were true descendants of Canaan versus those of the Indo-European Hittites? And that's not to excuse Canaan. We covered this previously, that he was under two curses, namely the one Noah placed on him, and the other curse was the result of him taking land that belonged to Shem. So it's very likely that his wicked deeds allowed him to intermingle more easily with the fallen race. Let's go on. It says Winkler assumes that the Amorites, somewhere about the time of the El Armana tablets, descended into Palestine from their original northern habitations, who lived in the North family. It says he supports this by the fact that only those of the earlier biblical tradition which belong to the northern kingdom contain the name Amorites, namely the prophet Amos, and those parts of the Pentateuch which the critics assign to the Elohistic or Ephraimitic writer, followed by Deuteronomy. Now I'm going to share some excerpts from this book called The Empire of the Amorites by Albert Clay. This book was written in 1919, but it's going to shed some more light on this. It says the Amorites are regarded in the Old Testament as pre-Israelite inhabitants of Palestine, where we get the correct impression that their history largely belonged to the past. The term Amorite is used as having an ethnic signification, but it was also used frequently in a collective or geographic sense. The Canaanites lived along the coast, and the Amorites in the hills or high ground, but the terms are frequently used synonymously. In some instances, all the inhabitants of the land, the Hittites, Jebusites, Hivites, etc., are designated as Amorites, even the Philistines. And in other instances, the Amorites are listed among the different peoples of the country. It says efforts have been put forth by some to show from these pictorial representations that the Canaanite Amorites were Indo-Europeans. Others have declared the type to be distinctly Semitic. So it's because you had both groups in the land, much like how we have different groups calling themselves Americans because they live here, but they came from elsewhere. It goes on to say, doubtless the tallness of the stature and even other anatomical characteristics resulted from the race mixture that the type represents and which the artist recognized, taking everything, however, into consideration. It is not at all improbable that the type that was predominant in this region, though partially Semitic, represented much that was foreign and perhaps aboriginal. Now he's going to tell us how they came by this name, Amorite. It says the word Amorite in the Old Testament has been as familiar to biblical students during the past centuries as almost any other designation of ancient peoples, but with comparatively little understanding as to what the term meant. This is largely due to the fact that the imperial history of the people came to a close prior to 2000 BC. The term Amorite, used in the Old Testament for a people who lived in Palestine and the region east of the Jordan, as is generally understood, appears only with the gentilic ending, and with two exceptions, always with the article ha-Amori, the Amorite. So in the cuneiform inscriptions, it's shown as Amori, Amori, and it can be vocalized as Amor. It was also called Amaru. It says Amaru was not only the name of the country, but also the name of the chief deity of the land, as were Ashur, Tela, Mash, and perhaps Anu. Now the caption says Amaru is regarded by Langdon as an early Sumerian term for the West Land, land of storms. He holds that Martu is to be read Maru, a confusion of signs for Amaru. Haupt regards Amaru as an ancient Assyrian name for the Mediterranean, like Yam in the Hebrew. Now the author is going to talk about the various deities of Amaru. It says an exhaustive study of the religions of Amaru would embrace not only all the ancient inscriptions that have been discovered in the land, including the Old Testament, but all the light that can be gathered from contemporaneous sources. So let's look at what it says about these gods of the Amorites. In not a few instances, it has been ascertained that the character of gods was changed after they had been transported to other lands. So let's remember that they were making their own idols, so they could easily move them from place to place. This is saying that when they moved them to another location, they would then ascribe different characteristics to the god based on the new destination. It goes on to say these changes may have been due to various causes. The deity of the mountains, when brought into the plains, would gradually lose his mountainous character. A storm god transported to a rainless land would naturally have other attributes emphasized. If E is Amorite, as is claimed, and the ideogram Enki, this god they called Lord of the Earth, is an indication of the nature of the god in the country where he was indigenous, we can only conclude that it was when brought to Eridu in southern Babylonia, a city that had been built on land regained from the sea, that he became a god of the springs and the deep. Another modification which the original character of certain deities suffered was the change in sex, a question which Barton and others have fully discussed. When the goddess Ashirta was carried into Arabia, she became the god Athtar, and the god Shamash became a goddess. In the Nippur name syllabary, it would seem that Shamash in the name Tuli Id Samsi was also regarded as feminine. Urda, the goddess of the Amorites in Babylonia, became masculinized, although the name in Urda stood for a goddess as well as a god. So what do we have here? Deities that are hermaphrodites, like Baphomet. They are non-binary, male and female. Why do you think this trans movement is so prevalent right now? The evil one is trying to transform man into his image and likeness. Even Venus was known to have an androgynous character according to certain ancient writers. It goes on to say that, as is well known, the generic designations or titles as El for God, Baal for Lord or owner, with its corresponding feminine form Ba'alat, were used in connection with deities of different localities. It seems Malik or Melech, probably the same as Molech of the Old Testament, was another such appellation or name designation. It says, in only a few instances can the names of the deities who are represented by such designations be surmised. To cite a single example, the Baal of Haran was the moon god Sin. In Egypt, Baal became the name of a deity, as was Bel, which is another name for Marduk in the Neo-Babylonian period. The author says Adon, meaning Lord, is another such term. Now I want to read some excerpts from this book called The Hittites, the story of a forgotten empire, and I believe it will connect some of the dots about the Amorites. The author is H. Sayce, and this book was written in 1890. It says the Hittites and Amorites were therefore mingled together in the mountains of Palestine, like the two races which ethnologists tell us go to form the modern Celt. But the Egyptian monuments teach us that they were of very different origin and character. The Hittites were a people with yellow skins and mongoloid features, whose receding foreheads, oblique eyes, and protruding upper jaws are represented as faithfully on their own monuments as they are on those of Egypt, so that we cannot accuse the Egyptian artists of caricaturing their enemies. If the Egyptians have made the Hittites ugly, it was because they were so in reality. Take a look at this image from the book. It's a slab with Hittite sculptures. This was photographed near Antab in Turkey, and I found it interesting that the children sitting above look nothing like the images on the slab. Here's a close-up of the Hittites on the slab. Do these sons of Ham look Negroid to you? These Hittites look like trolls to me. Look at the nose. But what we need to know is, did their kinfolk, the Amorites, look like the men portrayed here? Let's see what the author says. It says the Amorites, on the contrary, were a tall and handsome people, and you're going to see why they call them tall and handsome. They are depicted with white skin, blue eyes, and reddish hair, all the characteristics, in fact, of the white race. Now, honestly, do you think the original descendants of Canaan would have looked that way? So the Amorites, being described here, looked like a certain part of the population in the British Isles, with their clear, white, freckled skins, it says, their blue eyes, and their golden red hair and tall stature. In Palestine also, we still come across representatives of a fair complexioned, blue-eyed race, in whom we may see the descendants of the ancient Amorites, just as we see in the Kabyles of the descendants of the ancient Libyans. We know that the Amorite type continued to exist in Judah long after the Israelitish conquest of Canaan. The captives, taken from the southern cities of Judah by Shishak in the time of Rehoboam, and depicted by him upon the walls of the great temple of Karnak, are people of Amorite origin. Their regular profile of subaquiline cast, as Mr. Tompkins described it, their high cheekbones and martial expression, are the features of the Amorites and not the Yehudi. Let's wrap up with this. It says, tallness of stature has always been a distinguishing characteristic of the white race. Hence, it was that the Anakim, the Amorite inhabitants of Hebron, seemed to the Hebrew spies to be as giants, while they themselves were but as grasshoppers by the side of them. After the Israelitish invasion, remnants of the Anakim were left in Gaza and Gath and Ashkelon, and in the time of David, Goliath of Gath and his gigantic family were objects of dread to their neighbors. Now, obviously, they were much taller than what the author is trying to portray here. For the Israelites to say that they were like grasshoppers compared to them tells us that those giants were extremely tall. What else was revealed in this book? These Amorites could not have been the original sons of Canaan. These are hybrids. There are so many lies to uncover. It's easier to list things they have not lied about. Truth be told, all of the original people were dark, melanated people, and a lot of them were colonized and whitewashed. The people represented as Canaanites seem to be Indo-Europeans. So the descendants of Canaan were taken over. They were replaced by a people who came from elsewhere. We will continue the discussion and go over more information about the Rephaim and their connection to the Amorites next time. If this message has been a blessing to you, please hit the like and share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.